Platoon wasn't just a film. It was a scream, a confession, a raw wound torn open and projected on screen. What Oliver Stone created wasn't entertainment, it was exorcism. A truth so painful, so personal, that it bled through every frame. Today, we're diving into the shocking, untold stories behind Platoon. Not just what made it Oscar-worthy, but what made it unforgettable, traumatic, dangerous, and real. So sit tight, because once we enter this jungle, there's no going back. Part 1. A war that never left. Before the cameras ever rolled, Platoon lived inside the mind of a young soldier named Oliver Stone. Long before he became an Oscar-winning director, Stone was crawling through the jungles of Vietnam with the 25th Infantry Division and later the 1st Cavalry. He wasn't writing scripts then. He was writing survival into his skin, bullet by bullet, night by night. Stone was wounded twice. He was decorated with a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart, but no medal could ease the torment that followed him home. So he wrote, not to entertain, but to understand. The first draft of Platoon was born in 1971, only months after his return from the war. But no studio would touch it. Vietnam? Too raw, too recent, too real. Sat ignored for 15 years, until Salvador earned him a sliver of trust from Hollywood. That sliver became a door, and behind it, the jungle waited. Part 2, the boot camp from hell. To make Platoon, Stone didn't just want realism. He wanted truth, the kind of truth that breaks skin and shatters comfort. So he sent his cast, Charlie Sheen, Willem Dafoe, Tom Berenger, and others, into the Philippine jungle for a 2-week military boot camp. No trailers, no agents, no phones, just foxholes, 60-pound packs, and meals that tasted like 1968. Led by retired Marine Dale Dye, the actors dug their own latrines, ran night patrols, and slept in mud. Dye even kept Charlie Sheen deliberately confused and underinformed to simulate the disoriented fear of a new recruit, just like his character, Chris. The experience wasn't just harsh. It was psychologically brutal. Actors were kept in character 24/7. Those playing hardened vets like Berenger were encouraged to dominate. The newbies like Sheen were isolated and intimidated. By the time filming began, no one was acting. They were surviving, and that edge of exhaustion and fear bled onto the screen, raw, ragged, and unforgettable. Part 3. The jungle doesn't forgive. Shooting in the Philippines wasn't just method, it was mayhem. The set of Platoon became a live endurance test. Charlie Sheen sprained his ankle running through a real trench during an explosion. Forrest Whitaker cut his hand on barbed wire. Johnny Depp? He got an ear infection that wouldn't quit. Tom Berenger, wearing a prosthetic facial scar in the blazing tropical heat, developed skin irritation. Willem Dafoe bruised his ribs on a rough fall. No stunt doubles, no rewrites, just pain captured in camera. Rain turned everything into slick mudslides. Explosives were dangerously close. One nearly caught an extra on fire. Real gunfire from nearby military exercises echoed through the hills, adding an unnerving realism to the chaos. And yet, Stone didn't pull back. He believed pain created honesty. So when you see Sheen limp or Dafoe stumble, it's not acting. It's real. Part 4, Becoming Barnes. Tom Berenger didn't just play Sergeant Barnes. He became him. Scarred, menacing, unpredictable, Barnes was a monster molded by war. And Berenger, staying in character even off-camera, turned the set into a pressure cooker. He avoided his fellow castmates. He spoke only in growls. He wandered the jungle, fully dressed, muttering and brooding. Younger actors steered clear. Some were genuinely afraid. During scenes, his improvisations were so intense that even Sheen admitted his fear on camera was real. When Barnes confronts Chris and says, "You got no idea what I am," that wasn't a line. That was a warning. Berenger even cut himself on set and insisted they keep going. Because for Barnes, the war never ends. And for Berenger, that brutal transformation earned him an Oscar nod and a place in cinematic history. Part 5, that opening shot? That was no set. Remember the opening of Platoon? That misty clearing, the whir of rotor blades slicing through jungle air, soldiers filing off the chopper, faces young, scared, and blank. It doesn't feel like a movie. It feels like you're there. That's because you are. There was no green screen, no computer-generated smoke, no Hollywood trickery. That was a real jungle in Luzon, Philippines. The landing zone, an actual remote military site, surrounded by thick foliage and inaccessible by roads. The only way in or out was by air. The helicopters were genuine UH-1 Hueys, the same model used in Vietnam. The pilots, active members of the Philippine military, trained in real combat drops. There were no rehearsals, just one take. Multiple cameras were placed on the ground and in the sky. When the Hueys descended, the pressure waves flattened grass, rattled camera rigs, and blasted sweat from the actors' faces. Charlie Sheen, playing the fresh recruit Chris Taylor, wasn't given a heads-up. Stone deliberately withheld details, dropping him into the scene just like a soldier arriving in a war zone. The look on his face, wide-eyed, dazed, overwhelmed, isn't performance. It's pure human reaction, and everything around him reinforced the illusion. The smoke curling through the trees came from real military-grade smoke pots, not post-production filters. The extras unloading gear weren't professional actors. They were partially trained Filipino soldiers in costume, moving with the muscle memory of real combat. Even their silence added to the authenticity. No barking orders, no dramatic speeches, just the heavy, exhausted quiet of men entering hell. The production team spent weeks scouting that location using military maps, topography studies, and satellite data to ensure every frame matched historical drop zones from the Vietnam War. Equipment was carried in by hand, and the humidity was so intense that lenses fogged, costumes soaked through, and skin broke out in heat rashes before the first take. By the time that first shot ended, the audience wasn't watching a war movie, they were in one. Stone's genius wasn't just in what he filmed, but how he made us feel it. No orientation, no easing in, just impact, confusion, noise, dust, heat. It was a cinematic ambush. From that moment on, Platoon stopped being a film and became a battlefield. Part 6, Platoon almost died before it lived. All of this, the boot camp, the jungle, the blood, the sweat, almost never happened. Just weeks before filming, the film's financial backer pulled out. Suddenly, Platoon was dead in the water. Enter Arnold Kopelson, an independent producer who saw the script and said, "This isn't a war movie. This is a revelation." He funded the film, but insisted on a tight 54-day shoot and a shoestring $6 million budget. That's pennies for a war film, so Stone adapted. Fewer sets, real locations, guerrilla filming, natural light. At one point, they were filming without permits, just pure run-and-gun cinema. When the film was done, executives were stunned. Audiences were breathless. What started as a long shot became a global phenomenon, earning over $130 million and winning 4 Academy Awards. From near extinction to legend, just like the men it portrayed. Part 7, Real Soldiers. Real trauma. Not every man on screen was acting. Some had already lived through the war. Oliver Stone brought real soldiers into the film, American and Filipino veterans, some who had served in Vietnam itself. These men added more than background noise. They brought authenticity, pain, silence, knowledge. They taught the actors how to move, how to shoot, how to communicate with nothing but a hand signal. But their presence came at a cost. One broke down during a napalm scene. Another left the set, unable to relive the trauma. This wasn't fiction to them. It was a mirror. Stone said filming with them felt like returning to the war zone. Their haunted eyes, dirty uniforms, and trembling hands were never polished for the camera. They were just real. Part 8, one take, one legend. There are film moments, and then there are film monuments. Sergeant Elias running through the jungle, arms stretched skyward as bullets tear through him, became Platoon's heartbeat. An image that etched itself into cinema history. That haunting silhouette, equal parts crucifixion, surrender, and rage, has been analyzed, framed, even mimicked, but never replicated. And incredibly, it was shot in one single take. Willem Dafoe had only one shot, literally and figuratively. His body was rigged with dozens of squibs, each time to explode in precise order, simulating bullet hits as he sprinted. The choreography was insanely complex. Multiple helicopters roared overhead in tight formation. Ground cameras moved through uneven jungle terrain. Aerial shots had to frame him perfectly between blasts and trees. Everyone had a role and no one could mess up. But then came Dafoe, the X-Factor. What he did wasn't in the script. The stumble? Real. The crawl? Improvised. And the now iconic arm-raising gesture? Pure instinct. It was as if Elias wasn't just dying, he was reaching. For justice. For mercy. For salvation. Or maybe for nothing at all. Oliver Stone, watching on the monitor, was stunned. He didn't yell cut, he whispered it. What he'd just witnessed wasn't acting. It was something primal, spiritual, devastating. Defoe had given so much in that take that he suffered minor burns from the squib detonations and was completely winded. The crew erupted into spontaneous applause, unusual for a war film set where silence usually ruled. That moment, 10 seconds of screen time, became Platoon's poster, its VHS cover, and its eternal symbol. For many viewers, Elias' death summed up the entire war. Betrayal by your own, death without glory, and sacrifice misunderstood. Film historians have compared the scene to religious iconography. Elias becomes a Christ-like figure, not because he's perfect, but because he dies knowing he was betrayed. It's not just a death, it's a statement about morality, about war, about the loss of light in darkness, and the fact that it happened unscripted, unrehearsed, in one heartbeat of raw brilliance. That's not just filmmaking, that's cinematic destiny. Defoe called it exhausting. He was burned, bloody, but the shot was complete. That one take became the film's poster. His pulse, the soul. Part 9, Too Real to Be Safe. Platoon didn't sugarcoat war. It shoved its audience face first into the mud, the fear, the moral collapse. And not everyone could take it. When the film started making the festival rounds, whispers turned into controversy. Countries across Southeast Asia, places still scarred by the Vietnam War, were deeply uncomfortable. Thailand and Singapore moved to restrict it, claiming the film portrayed Southeast Asian civilians in a brutal, unforgiving light. Censors in Singapore argued that scenes of villagers being interrogated and executed were politically and culturally dangerous. They feared it could incite unrest or worse, reopen wounds their nations had worked hard to close. France, grappling with its own complex history of colonialism and anti-American sentiment, delayed the film's release over the ideological charge in its script. The ambiguity of good and evil, the American soldiers committing atrocities. It was too raw, too real. It wasn't the clean-cut war story the world was used to seeing. In South Korea, screenings were limited to adults only. Government officials believed the psychological impact of the film could be harmful, especially for younger viewers raised in a politically tense, heavily militarized environment. Even in the United States, the backlash was fierce. Conservative groups, veterans organizations, and even some political figures accused Oliver Stone of tarnishing the military's reputation. Platoon was called anti-American, anti-soldier, and even communist propaganda. This film makes our boys look like monsters, one critic wrote in a Washington op-ed, but Oliver Stone didn't flinch. "This is how it was," he said, "and if it disturbs you, good." For him, the film wasn't about politics. It was about truth, ugly, complicated, and human. Under pressure, Orion Pictures considered edits. Alternate international trailers were created with reduced violence. Warnings were added, but Stone refused to sanitize history. And then, something remarkable happened. Veterans around the world, many of whom had long felt forgotten or misunderstood, began showing up at screenings. In Australia, Canada, and the UK, post-viewing Q&As became impromptu therapy sessions. Men stood up in theaters, their voices shaking, saying, "That's it. That's what it was like. That's what we lived through." The film validated their memories, the horror, the guilt, the gray areas. For the first time, someone hadn't glorified them. Someone had seen them. Platoon may have been controversial, but for those who needed it most, it was necessary. Not just a film, but a reckoning. Part 10, the war film that changed everything. Before Platoon, Hollywood's war films were often built on a foundation of clear-cut heroes and noble causes. From the Green Berets to Patton, war was portrayed as a battlefield for valor. Flags waving, soldiers standing tall, sacrifice wrapped in a bow of patriotism. Soldiers were either warriors or martyrs. The enemy was always out there, never within. Then came Platoon, and it detonated all of that. This wasn't a story about medals or missions. It was about the rot that war plants in men's souls. It showed friendly fire, fragging, breakdown, betrayal. It told us that sometimes the worst thing that happens to a soldier isn't getting shot, it's surviving and carrying the war home in your head. Stone's depiction of war was psychological carnage. It pulled no punches in portraying the inner conflicts of soldiers like Chris Taylor, young, idealistic, and slowly unraveling in a moral hellscape. Heroes weren't shining examples of courage. They were Elias, noble, yes, but doomed, or Barnes, brutal, broken, terrifyingly human. Platoon refused to offer clean answers. It simply asked us to look. That refusal to romanticize or justify war opened the floodgates. Suddenly, war films didn't need to make us proud. They could make us think. They could make us hurt. Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket followed a year later, digging into the psychological conditioning of Marines. Then came Casualties of War, another Vietnam story with moral ambiguity. Saving Private Ryan redefined World War II with its bloody, chaotic opening. And later, The Hurt Locker would portray modern combat addiction with surgical precision. Stone's brutal honesty gave filmmakers permission to explore trauma, guilt, disillusionment, and moral injury, not just body counts. It shifted the lens from the battlefield to the mind, where the real war often continues long after the bullets stop flying. And it influenced more than just movies. Platoon became required viewing in history classes, film schools, and even some military training programs. Not because it was patriotic, but because it was honest. Stone didn't set out to change the genre. He just told the truth. And in doing so, he made it impossible to watch war on screen the same way again. It changed how schools taught war, not just dates and battles, but scars and silence. And it changed Oliver Stone. He followed it with Born on the 4th of July and Heaven and Earth, completing his Vietnam trilogy, not as a director, but as a witness. So what is Platoon, really? It's a film, a fever dream, a confession, a wound. It's the story of a war fought on two fronts, one with bullets, the other within the soul. And maybe that's why we still talk about it. Not because it entertains us, but because it dares us to remember, to face the darkness, and to understand that some wars never end.